Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Seabata Malibu. I am a junior researcher at Tales of Tinning. With me, I have my colleague, Steph Snell, who is a researcher at Tales of Tinning. And welcome to a collaborative webinar with the University of Zurich, of which the representative is Morgan Weg. We are excited to have you here at this collaborative webinar of a digital field study that shows community-led dialogue reduces spread of misinformation by 82%, by more than 80%. I am now quickly going to hand over to my colleague, Steph Snell, just to introduce himself and give us an overview and introduction to Tales of Tinning. Over to you, Steph.
Good day, everybody. Pleasure to be here, and this is a very exciting moment for us. We, at Tales of Turning, we started experimenting in social media in 2020, and by early 2021, we had a good idea of what was working on social media and what wasn't. In the 2021 local government elections in South Africa, we experimented with this methodology, and we were very pleased with the results. And at the same time, we met Morgan, who you will meet later, Morgan Rack, and Maddie Jalbert. Morgan was interested in what we were doing. He saw online that we were busy with stuff. And that led us to developing a collab, and him and Maddie and Morgan researched the methodology that we did in a laboratory in an A/B environment. And that returned some positive results. And then we took it further. And in last year's election, we ran an experiment in the wild. And we're very pleased that we have an evidence-based methodology that is effective in this space. I must just say one thing, we've built it from a Global South perspective. We don't have purchase over the algorithms, over the legislation in the Global North. And platforms are any way they can move. The internet is borderless, so people can operate from everywhere. Our focus has been is how do we strengthen users, or rather the people online, to better deal with the environment of social media. So I think if you can just give the next slide, please, Siabata. Thank you. So this is social media, research on social media is it's a very, very exciting field. And in fact, the way I look at it is that social media is really our collective mirror. And I think an important thing I want to leave with everybody is the 1 to 9 to 90 ratio in social media. It's a really good, useful thing to remember. So the noise in social media is generally made by 1% of people who are on social media. The people who interact with that noise is about 9% of social media, and the vast majority, the rest of social media, are observers. So it's really important to understand that what we're seeing that's problematic, where people are projecting their own anger and stuff in social media, is actually not a huge. The vast majority of people are not problematic. The other amazing thing about this methodology that's been developed through that process of studying social media is that it's agnostic. It doesn't favor any particular outcome. So if you've got a cause, it can't promote a cause. Excuse me. And what it does is it helps people to reflect. And that's the principal mechanism that we're going to be talking about a bit later. Can I have the next slide, please, Siapata? So this is the results, or a graph of the results from the first tests we did and what is now called social truth queries. And you can see quite clearly between the blue and the gray is the control group where there was no intervention. The blue was where there was an intervention, and that was a really strong indicator. Well, based on this, that we felt further research was necessary, because of course evidence is everything. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Siabato, who's going to talk a bit about the methodology that we use, and then Morgan will be telling you about his research and the paper thereafter. Thanks, Siabato. Over to you.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for giving us an overview of what Tales of Tinning does, and the work done by Tales of Tinning. So I'm just going to quickly get into the dialogue facilitation methodology, which is a methodology that we used with the work that we did with Morgan around in the elections. I think in the past general elections, where we were countering mis and disinformation on online platforms. So this methodology allows people or dialogue facilitators to encourage people to have self-reflective conversations on online platforms, whereby you are able to ask someone, if someone puts a piece of information on social media and I come as a dialogue facilitator, I'll come and engage with that piece of information by asking them, do you have proof of this? Or where did you get this piece of information? How do you know this? Responses that will encourage the author to reflect on what they have put online, because sometimes people do not know that what they've put online is actually fake news. But once you come with responses that encourage self-reflection, they are then able to go back and think about the piece of information that they have either reshared on online platforms or that they have put on online platforms. And that also encourages people who see or who are exposed to that piece of information to also question the truthfulness of the piece of information that is shared on online platforms. We have used this methodology with communities, with over, I think, communities in South Africa across different provinces, where we had encouraged them to encourage people to have self-reflective conversations on online platforms, to encourage people to have such conversations that encourage others to counter mis and disinformation, not in a manner of being defensive to people, because as soon as you come with with like an angle of saying, oh, but how do you know this? Or as soon as you come with an angle of saying, oh, this is a lie, this is not true, people usually shut down and they do not engage with you because they feel attacked. But if you come with a curious mind and you want to know more, with also the intention of making the author eventually see how harmful the piece of information they have put on online platforms is to others, that ensures that you are able to curb or to stop misinformation from spreading. We have used the dialogue facilitation methodology across many other projects that we've worked on. We've used it in the xenophobia space. We've used it in the gender-based violence and gender discrimination space, where we were able to engage with misogynistic posts on online platforms, which encourage people or authors of such posts reflect on how harmful what they put on online platforms is to others. We have also used this methodology to facilitate conversations around technology facilitated gender-based violence, whereby we were exposed to huge numbers of bullying, huge numbers of cyberbullying, and huge numbers of abuse that is happening online, especially abuse towards leaders who are women. And we were able to engage with people who would repost, who would make such abusive posts, and themselves victims of or survivors of intergenerational violence, whereby they were not even aware of how harmful what they put on online platforms is to others. The methodology is important because it encourages change, especially on online platforms, and it also equips one with tools such as digital content, which we are going to get into a bit later. It equips one with looking for keywords and hashtags. For example, if we are dialoguing on around the elections, we'll use hashtags that the social media listening tools that we use encourage us to use. For example, it will be hashtags around what's trending on the elections. It will be hashtags around what is happening on the elections. For example, the hashtags that we previously used were around rigged elections. The elections are rigged, and so forth information, and also hashtags that also are related to the subject at hand. And this methodology also, as I've mentioned earlier, counters mis and disinformation using the dialogue facilitation methodology. And it enables you to see the impact of dialogue facilitation, which Morgan will get into a bit later. We use the methodology the dialogue facilitation methodology has three pillars. One of them is the social truth questioning aspect pillar of the methodology, where you are questioning the truthfulness of information that is brought to you or information that is on online platforms. Both information, it can either be on online platforms or on offline platforms. You would do this by asking questions that encourage the author or the sayer to reflect on what they are sharing online, to also see, is this truth? We also use the methodology for messaging and amplification, whereby we are amplifying, if it's around GBV, gender-based violence, we are amplifying positive messaging around gender-based violence, or positive messaging around gender discrimination, and also deepening conversations on online platforms, bringing people to the fore to have conversations around sensitive issues, regardless of their different beliefs, regardless of their different sexual orientation, their different classes, or regardless of their different political backgrounds, of what's happening offline. So what is put out there is what's happening offline. These are the three pillars of the dialogue facilitation methodology. As I mentioned earlier, we also create digital content to support critical dialogue on online platforms, whereby we will be creating designs, digital designs around different contexts. For example, if we are dialoguing around the elections, we'll use digital content and branded in colloquial language so that it meets people where people are, and it doesn't have any labeling of an organization or any labeling of something that may lead people to think that this is an organized organization. So we use digital content to encourage dialogue on online platforms, also to deepen conversations, as we've seen one of the pillars of the dialogue facilitation methodology on online platforms. People are more likely to engage with pictures that are unbranded, pictures that are in different languages, or designs that are in different languages, just so that we get unfiltered raw data from online platforms, and we get unfiltered data that we will be able to use at the end of dialoguing online, and that we'll be able to use to present For our research, the designs vary. If we are dialoguing around gender discrimination, the designs will be around gender discrimination. If it's around the elections, the designs will obviously be around elections, and they are more hope based. They are more hope based. They encourage positive messaging around the context that we are dialoguing on, and they encourage people to engage more with the content that we share on online platforms. And they also enable people to feel like it's a safe space whereby they do not shy away from engaging on online platforms because they may believe that they have different beliefs or they have differences from engaging with the content that we share on online platforms. I'm now going to hand over to Morgan, just to give you an in-depth presentation of the research that we did with the University of Zurich. Over to you, Morgan.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Everything will be good. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I'm Dr. Morgan Wack from the University of Zurich. I'm at the Department of Communication and Media Research, and I've been working with the team from Tales of Turning for quite a few years now. We've been doing a lot of really great collaborative work to overview kind of their process and to do a lot of strategic testing to see how it holds up in kind of more rigorous analytical framework. And I think they've been really open to figuring out what exactly works from their methodologies and trying to fine tune what they think is effective. And this is sort of the culmination of that process. And I'll walk through some of the things that we've done in the past and what we're working on now. So just a quick bit of background. Let's see if the click. Uh, as many of you here may know, fact checking, while fairly common around the world, there are several disparities in terms of where fact check organizations actually are, and especially when you compare this to actual people, right? Several fact checking organizations, focus on Western countries, United States and Europe, and there are reasons for this, lots of them to do with financing. But it's not just that there are disparities in where organizations are, there's also disparities in the likelihood of things being fact checked and also how difficult it is to fact check misinformation and false claims in different parts of the world. Areas with several different types of official languages. Encrypted messaging applications are more popular. These are things that make it more difficult to fact check off mainstream platforms. So there are these disparities that aren't just driven by finances, but also systematic and structural reasons and make it kind of important to come up with alternatives. At the same time, we're seeing a pullback in the funding of fact-checking organizations, these types of structures from platforms and from governments around the world who have shifted to crowdsourced style systems and kind of pulled back from automated forms of fact checking, which used to sort of dominate this landscape. So it really is a moment when we are looking for sort of public partnerships and groups like Tales of Turning to try to create alternative forms of fact checking and alternative systems for content moderation online. When we first started out, so Steph was talking about this earlier, but one of our first programs we did was we took the general principles that they came up with at Tales of Turning, and we wanted to know in a laboratory setting, do the idea that people can comment on different types of posts, would this actually reduce people's perceived accuracy, willingness to share, and trustworthiness in different types of posters? And the idea is fairly simple, as we talked about before. And we're focused mainly in these studies on receivers, so people who are come across these posts or come across them in different contexts. And what we wanted to know is, does drawing attention to accuracy through these different types of questions and these statements work similarly to how you would draw attention to accuracy with labeling or with traditional fact checking? And what we found in these first settings, which were not based on political information, but were just about random rumors and conspiracies that were based online, was that they were very good at reducing people's perceived truth in this types of information, with some evidence that they also reduced intention to share. And so this was great initial proof, but of course, as I'm sure some of you know here, but just to reiterate, laboratory settings are not necessarily representative of real world environments in which misinformation spreads, especially with online networks, encrypted messaging apps, social context in place. If we take you to a lab and we present you with social media posts, you're already going to be primed to believe that something strange is going on. And so while this can be a good way of getting at maybe some sort of underlying principle, it's a big leap to then say, okay, we should put this into practice. This is definitely going to work. So what we did, and this is sort of building on work I've done elsewhere, which shows not just that fact checking is not always available, but that fact checking is incredibly slow usually. It's very difficult and resource intensive to figure out if a claim is true, come up with an appropriate citation, and then circulate that citation. In the US, this is from the US context. We find that fact checks in the median fact check for electoral misinformation took about 4 days after the initial misinformation was posted to actually be posted. And as you can see, the majority of the misinformation in these cases had already been spread at that time. So there's a need for kind of alternatives to fact checking that could work at much faster speeds and to try to cut off these types of spreads before they become amplified online. In a second study, we followed up in sort of a quasi-realistic claim area. We went to Kenya during their last general elections, and we took posts that were real misinformation stories, where we created posts based on those in real time. And we tried to split them up amongst kind of unproven claims and ambiguous claims. And the importance here is one more reason why STQs can be especially effective is that they're very flexible in addressing different types of claims. It's very difficult to respond to a post that says rigged through and through with a fact check because they're not actually really claiming a lot of things, but you can still ask, where did you get this information? These types of things that are much more flexible and allow you to kind of tailor the questions to the particular post. So in this context, what we did was we took misinformation that was spreading around the actual Kenyan election, and we got a representative sample of online Kenyan users, our best estimation or approximation of that, and we tried to study whether SDQs would work still in a survey setting, but in a survey experimental setting with real users from this context with real misinformation around political information. And encouragingly, we find that again, it was very accurate. It reduced accuracy or perceived accuracy amongst all kinds of respondents, reduced sharing somewhat, although not statistically significant, and also reduced trust in repeat spreaders. And from what we know about who spreads misinformation, especially electoral misinformation online, it's very important to get people to maybe reduce their trust in particular people if they're spreading lots of content. And like the post that Steph showed earlier, this was particularly true across the board for susceptible participants. So these are people who were more likely to believe misinformation in general. These effects amongst SDQs were particularly effective in that group. So we got to this point and we kind of got together. We said, okay, this is great. It's working in these relatively anodyne environments or sanitized environments, although the Kenyan case was an extension. We want to know what is the kind of actual real world effect of SDQs. There are several reasons to think that they might be less effective in real world settings. If you have to deal with partisan attachments, if you have to come across things, people may ignore these posts in real time. They might not see the comments. But there are also reasons to think that they might be more effective. If we take you into a lab or we present you with a survey and we say, look at this post, do you think it's true or not? You're already going to be very suspicious, unlike you would be when you're scrolling through posts and social media feeds online. So though we were relatively agnostic as to whether the effect would be, bigger or smaller than what we've seen. And our main question was, can SDQs help limit the spread of election misinformation in the context of a real world election? And so I think I didn't do a big background on the South African elections, but hopefully most people here know some about the elections that took place. It was a very competitive election in South Africa, and there was a lot of misinformation online. And there were several different types of rumors about electoral fraud and conspiracies online that needed to be debunked, and several of the organizations, including Tales of Turning, sort of were working both ahead of time and during the electoral period to combat some of these rumors. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to run what we call, a digital field experiment, which are quite rare in the context of online social media research. And that's because it's just very difficult to get a group that's committed like Tales of Turning and to have them actually randomize and work with researchers to try to do it in a systematic way of applying their different types of theories to study it in a comprehensive manner. And so what we wanted to do was a randomized digital field experiment. And so this is sort of how it worked on the back end. But what we did was there was a systematic setup from the trained volunteers at Tales of Turning. And what we essentially did was they would come across a post if it was validated within our criteria of being relatively new, based on the election, and false or misleading. Then they would come up with the SDQ response that they wanted to the post to make it tailored to that response. And then they would click a randomization button that would tell them, yes, you should actually post it, or no, you should actually not. And this is sort of the critical component of the randomization design, is that ahead of time, they did not know whether they would actually be responding to the post or not. And so we would then record, did you actually respond? Did you not actually respond? And we would come back a week later and see how many likes did this video get? Was it in the treatment or control group? How many bookmarks, other types of aspects on Twitter specifically. So we ended up with basically, after some excluded accounts, posts removed, taking away some of these larger influencers, about 125 posts containing election misinformation in our trial. Just from random luck, we had 60 in the treatment group and 65 in the control group. This is sort of what the posts would look like in practice. This is, a social media post online saying that there is a particular social media claim, and they would be randomly assigned to a select SDQ to be posted underneath in the real world. In the end, there were several responses that the respondents could choose from. Some of these were translated from Zulu and other languages, but these were the general claims. Are you for real? Is this true? What led you to think this? What proof do you have of this? And why did you say this? And so these were the main responses that were used in this case, and these were taken from the other studies as sort of the most effective and most general question responses that worked for SDQs. And they, as you can see, they were sort of evenly split across treatment and control, which you would expect given that it was randomized. Oops. Okay, so we also ran a survey experiment using these types of posts. So to both serve as a check on the actual randomization of the experiment and also to test some of the mechanisms, what we did is we took posts that were not responded to, but real posts, and we put them into a couple survey experiments, and we ran them alongside the actual experiment amongst participants online from South Africa to test whether the posts were systematically assigned to control and treatment, but also to study, what is actually working here. Is it the effect on accuracy? Is it the effect on sharing? What is driving some of these results, if we are to see any? And so the results from this study were very, very encouraging. Mostly kind of reductions across the board in pretty much every category we looked at. While it was only statistically significant for reposts and likes, this makes a lot of sense because those are the categories that you see the highest numbers. So a lot of times with bookmarks, people just don't bookmark things very often. So with only 125 posts in our sample, although we see a slight reduction, it's just harder to get signals of statistical significance. But I think in likes in particular, this is sort of the highest metric and denotation of engagement. The reduction of likes at this high rate was extremely surprising. I think we didn't expect it to be that high. And of course, we would love to do some follow-up studies to see if this holds up, but this is all very encouraging. I think probably more interesting to Tales of Turning in terms of their own kind of work. What we find is that this is especially true in the first hour of application. So the majority of the posts, because we sort of worked with the team there to focus on brand new posts and sort of catching things as they arose online using search keywords and search queries. We find that if your post was posted, if the SDQ was assigned within the first hour, it was much more effective than if it was assigned later on. And if you can remember back to the fact-checking plot that I showed you earlier, if you were relying on real comprehensive fact-checking, it's going to be too slow. Right? It's going to be far too slow to have these types of effects, at least in the same way. I mean, fact-checking works for other reasons. There are definitely benefits to fact-checking, but if you're just trying to cut off the spread of engagement on particular posts around an election, it's going to be very difficult to do that with the resources that are available to a lot of fact-checking organizations. And so this is a very good insight, not just for people using SDQs, but I think people using lots of different types of labeling, types of methodologies, and other types of communication technologies that are trying to debunk claims online. Finally, looking at the survey component, as we expected, kind of based on the other evidence that we saw and in the previous studies, we again see reduction in both trust in the posters themselves and also accuracy in the particular posts across the two survey waves that we ran. So sort of helpful confirmatory evidence, and we see it as sort of illustrating in the short term that it reduces accuracy in the particular posts, but given that many of these posters are repeat posters and repeat spreaders, it's likely to have a sustained impact in that if somebody brings you a second claim and you know the first one was questionable, you're less likely to believe that down the line as well. So what are our main takeaways? The main one, and I think the one that is the headliner, is that STQs in the real world setting can limit the spread of election misinformation. And so building out of our research from like laboratory setting to survey experiments to actual real world experimentation, we have consistent evidence that STQs are effective across all these settings and maybe even more effective in the real world settings where people are not drawn to the attention of these labels ahead of time than they would be in laboratory settings, which is very encouraging. Second, like I said, they were most effective when applied relatively quickly. So very flexible tool of SDQs. A lot of times this is something to think about if you're interested in working with fact checking, trying to maybe automate some of this work or to expand a lot of this so that it is applied much more quickly does seem to have a large effect on whether these things reach larger velocity or amplified online. And I think this makes theoretical sense, right? If you come across a post and the one comment on it is drawing your attention to its potential accuracy, that's going to be a lot less more effective than if it has 150 likes already, or it's already been spread by a certain amount of people. Then you might not even see the comment, or the comment might be one of many signals to its credibility. And finally, bringing it back to the several different studies we've done with Tales of Turning, we would just like to illustrate the collaborations that I've done with my collaborator, Maddie Gelwood, out of the University of Washington, and Tales of Turning, showing that you can sort of maybe substitute or at least attempt to improve online spaces for content, making it safer for people, making the quality of content more beneficial around elections by partnering with organizations who work outside of kind of official structures, particularly in the global south, where platforms are not necessarily even as responsive as they are elsewhere, which is still relatively limited in terms of responsiveness. And with data being cut back and many of the funding opportunities for fact checking being cut back, STQs and other types of collaborations with local organizations and local programs represent sort of a sustained or a sustainable strategy for expanding this work in different types of contexts. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. That's my email, or I think my email's on my website as well. The preprint for this article that this study is based on is also online. And you can find that, I believe, in the webinar invitation. But if you send me an email, I'm also happy to send you that. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Morgan. Yeah, there's one question, and that I can see is that, did you share this expanded information privately or to their post publicly? I think that something that perhaps didn't come across is that what we do is we train interest groups in civil society to do this work. So effectively what's happening is that people are doing this voluntarily of their own volition. And we're looking to train about 2,500 of them for the coming election. So it's civil society that's responding at the end. People are doing it of their own volition, and we share no information publicly of what people are doing. The ethics or the Poppy Act and other things prevents us from doing that. I don't know if there's any other questions that have come up, or if anybody would like to ask a question. While we're waiting,
Steph, I had a question,
yes.
if it's possible.
Yes, Martin.
This is Martin, yeah. So I'm always curious. The question I put in the chat was these questions of, your sources or, those kind of inquiries. Do you do that publicly, or is this something you can send in a private message, or if there's a friend, you reach out to them directly? What types of
No,
interventions are
so
these, and what you found most effective?
the volunteers who are doing this online themselves, they would do it in their timeline. So whoever it would be a public, if it's a public account, it would, and it's put out publicly, it would be a public question. So it's not done privately. We don't inbox privately, and people are doing it of their own volition on whatever platforms they function on and prefer to spend time in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just add to that quickly, Martin. I think one thing to think of is who the target audience is. In this case, we are looking at the spread of the content itself, not necessarily repeat patterns amongst the posters. So there's basically two outcomes you could see. You could see the posters themselves reducing their posting of questionable content in the future, or you could see other people coming across questionable content and not sharing it further. And since we're focusing here on the second one, we want this to be public so that people see the SDQs and question the content accuracy. But it would be really interesting to see. I think there is one RCT that I know of, one of the other few digital research studies, I believe I think it's by a group out of NYU, CSMAP, that did send some private messaging to people in the past. I can't remember the exact kind of context for the study, but there has been some work on that, and it was also sort of a different outcome, but an interesting use of this type of questioning as well.
Yeah. My question comes from, the challenge of challenging someone's identity, what they're posting is closely connected to how they want to be seen in the world. And so the delicacy of gently challenging that identity publicly, and what different outcomes that produces.
Those are the most innocuous
Uh,
questions we could come up with. And the
yeah.
whole point is not to elicit a negative response from them. So it's really important that there is that no judgment is communicated in that process. Otherwise, it loses its efficacy. And then, of course, the other problem is if people feel challenged, then you invite them to expand the argument that they're working in. We discovered that in some early lessons we learned. So it's really, really focused at innocent inquiry. Does that help, Martin?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else?
Martin, I'm not sure if you have any other questions. Go ahead, please, Tom.
Oh, sorry, I was navigating the UI on my phone, but yeah, it was very encouraging results. My question is about that idea of, are there times where it is effective to challenge more strongly when the kind of disinformation is like so obvious and bad? And I'm thinking like the audience isn't the person you're engaging with. It's actually everyone else who's going to then read um, the reply and like read like, or the people who are just reading and not even commenting. Is there any like comparison with these different approaches of like light touch, non antagonistic versus a more direct like calling out of clear cases of disinformation? And like, are there different situations where one's effective or what are the others more effective?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer your question, but the mechanism is when you look at something, your first response is your emotive, and then when a moment there's a question, it brings thought in, and that's really why why it drops. So it's a simple kind of psychological trigger, if you like. Our view is that many people who are projecting stuff in social media are in pain, and they want to argue about stuff. They want to get engage around stuff. So you run the risk of expanding what they're trying to propagate. So that's a really important thing to avoid. The other thing is that we've also discovered that you can't really educate people on social media. They're not interested in being told, and people doubt where the information comes from, and they also question what your agenda is as soon as you're trying to correct them. So what we do with this is when there is a response to a social truth question, then a dialogue facilitator will engage, and then the point of that engagement is then to deepen the conversation. So our objective is reflection, and when we can go beyond reflection, it's in trying to deepen the dialogue. What's really important for us is what's in their heads and not so much what's in ours. And we really try. The focus is on these are little miniature steps in developing critical thinking. The other thing, of course, is that it's likely very compatible with AI, but without the human in the intervention, I'm still have to talk to Morgan about that, but we need to do some experimenting around that as well.
Yeah, I would say one additional thing that might be of interest in one of our previous studies, the one in Kenya, we had one of the SDQs that was, I would say, a bit sassier would be the term that I would use. Where we said, do other people actually believe this? Which was, I think, a bit more sardonic and maybe a bit more biting. Not on purpose, but I think it just came off that way. And it was the least effective of any of the SDQs in that study. And I do think if your goal is maybe to get that person to change their behavior, we haven't looked into that enough to know. But I think if your goal is to get other people to take the question seriously or as it with good intent, the evidence from our studies suggests it's better to be more welcoming and sort of meet them halfway.
Okay, I'm not sure, Tom, are you happy with it?
Yeah, definitely. I think my follow-up would be, we don't have to get into it now, but like, is the main target to change that one person when these are public conversations? So I'm just conscious of the many other people who are following a thread. And is there, I don't think this was in the scope of your study, like how to, and I'm not even sure how you practice, but like how to shift those people's opinions. And it would just be interesting to know if the same like inviting reflection has that impact on them, or actually just someone's saying, here is some alternate, like here's some other research or something, just like presenting a counter argument, not necessarily engaging. So I've done that for Men Engage, where people have like made men's rights type arguments, and then I've just said, here's what we actually believe, and like directed them to the core principles. I'm not really aiming that response at them as such, because I know I'm not gonna like get them to change their mind, but it does show that I'm engaging in the conversation, like a lot of businesses do when they get like a bad review or something on Google reviews. They'll respond even if the reviewer is like really abusive or something, and it just shows everyone else actually that this is a reasonable person or organization sharing a strong argument and showing like a constructive response. But I get that wasn't necessarily the scope of this study. Thanks.
Well, I would say that I do think that's what we do the surveys for as a kind of component of this study is where those are people who are just audience members seeing this post and saying if it reduces their accuracy, reduces their willingness to share. And so I do think there's some of that in there, but yeah, it's a great point.
There's another question about partnership with the electoral management body. So there are two things to that. I mean, that is possible. We have kept them informed as we move along. But the whole point of this is for civil society to gain control of the social media environment themselves. The other thing for electoral commissions is that they would need permission from all the political parties to bring this on, or potentially anyway. I'm not sure how well that would go, because I'm not sure if this works well for parties that have populist agendas. And then a third thing is that it affects people's uptake of bots as well, or people's responses to bots, which is also very useful. Okay, if there are no more,
that.
Thanks, Siabata.
Thank you,
Carry
Steph.
on.
We are ready to wrap up, unless if there's anyone that has a question. As you can see, Morgan shared his email address. You can also get in touch with us at talesoftraining@gmail.com. We are more than happy to engage more in this process. And yeah, I'm not sure if you would like to say anything else, Morgan.
I just put my email in the chat for anyone who missed it before. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Happy to chat more about this research. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to continue to do a lot of these interesting collaborations.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Steph, do you want to close for us?
No, just to thank Morgan very much. There is one more message there, but I think I'll just respond in an email, if that's okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day further.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I think it went well. I think it was brilliant. The fact that they had questions and to be uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Okay, I think we need to just send a mail out for that one quick question from Susan Wong. Get you out of the chat. Okay, I'll just send it. Send it to everybody.
Which do you want? Are we gonna send them like a mailer, or do you want to?
All the people who
get access to it on YouTube once we upload it to YouTube.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we'll do it that way then.
So do you want her? Do you want to her email address?
No, then what we could do is, because the email list of everybody was in meeting. We could.
Okay. You need me to catch.
Yeah.
Let me try and find it then.
Okay, and Susan Wong's email address. Well, it'll be in the
Okay.
and the email address, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good job. Yeah. We'll talk tomorrow.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Sure, Steph.